Everyone knows Clark Gable, the man whose presence defined Hollywood's golden age. He was the smoldering Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, the roguish charmer in It Happened One Night, and the cinematic icon who turned masculinity into legend. With an Oscar on his shelf and millions of fans swooning in the darkened theaters of the 1930s and 40s, he was called simply the King of Hollywood. But while the public worshipped the king, his private life was a kingdom in ruins. He buried the love of his life, Carole Lombard, after a tragic plane crash. He kept a daughter hidden in secrecy, refusing to acknowledge her existence. He died suddenly at just 59, leaving behind a pregnant widow and an unborn son who would grow up with a last name too heavy to bear. Few people realize, however, that Clark Gable's story didn't end with his children. 2 grandchildren would carry forward his bloodline, born into the fractured legacies of Judy Lewis, the denied daughter, and John Clark Gable, the haunted son. Each grandchild inherited not only his DNA, but also the lingering shadow of Hollywood's greatest myth. For one, the name meant escape. A life deliberately lived far from the glare of cameras, far from the lies and secrets that poisoned her mother's youth. A choice for quiet, for anonymity, for peace. For the other, the name was a brand, a ticket into Hollywood circles, a lure for fame, and a curse that demanded he live up to a ghost he could never meet. His story would end far too soon, with flashing ambulance lights replacing the flashbulbs of red carpets. Together, these 2 grandchildren reveal the fragile fate of a dynasty, the hidden cost of inheriting a legendary name. What really happened to Clark Gable's grandchildren?
Clark Gable's children never stood on level ground. Judy Lewis, born in scandal, spent her life denied, her very existence erased to protect her mother's career and her father's reputation. John Clark Gable, born months after his father's death, inherited the Gable name, but not the guidance that might have steadied him beneath its weight. These fractures in the second generation shaped the third. Judy Lewis carried the pain of secrecy into motherhood. She never forgot what it meant to be hidden, and when she raised her daughter Maria, she was determined to give her a different life. That meant no Hollywood lights, no tabloid whispers, no burden of explaining who her father was or why he wouldn't claim her. Maria's childhood was the opposite of Judy's, stable, private, intentionally ordinary. But that privacy came at a price. While Maria was shielded from Hollywood's spotlight, she was also shielded from its legacy. She grew up in the long shadow of a secret that had only recently been told. On the other side of the family stood John Clark Gable, a man forever haunted by the ghost of the father he never knew. Where Judy chose healing, John battled turmoil, failed marriages, arrests, and a brief, troubled attempt at acting. And into that storm was born his son, Clark James Gable III. Unlike Maria, he didn't inherit silence, he inherited expectation. Reporters called him the spitting image of his grandfather. Photographers compared his jawline, his smile, his swagger to the King of Hollywood. For Clark Gable III, there was no escape from the legacy, only the temptation to chase it. These 2 grandchildren were heirs to the same dynasty, yet they lived opposite lives. One chose anonymity, the other chose the spotlight. One avoided the curse of a name, the other embraced it and paid the price. Because behind the golden glow of Gone with the Wind was not just one broken family, but a legacy fractured across generations.
Number 2. Maria Lewis. Born in the early 1960s, the only daughter of Judy Lewis, Clark Gable's secret child with Loretta Young. Maria entered the world not under the blinding lights of Hollywood, but in the quieter corners of her mother's later life. By the time she was born, Judy had already endured decades of secrecy and silence, raised without the acknowledgement of her famous father. Judy had spent her childhood wrestling with questions, her adolescence uncovering painful truths, and her adulthood searching for closure. When she became a mother herself, she was determined that her daughter would never bear the same scars. Maria's childhood was far removed from Hollywood premieres and studio lots. Judy, who had worked as an actress in television before turning to psychotherapy, built a private life for her family. She gave Maria stability, something she herself had never been granted. Where Judy had been forced to live a lie, Maria grew up with the truth. She knew who her grandfather was. She knew the circumstances that had denied her mother recognition. But unlike Judy, she carried this knowledge without the weight of scandal, because by the time Maria came of age, the era of whispered secrets was over. Still, the legacy of Clark Gable was never far away. In family conversations, in old photographs, in the pages of Judy's memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, Maria was reminded of the grandfather she would never meet and the empire of fame that had once nearly destroyed her mother. But instead of pursuing that fame, Maria chose distance. She never became a Hollywood figure, never courted the press, never sought roles on stage or screen. In fact, her life has been so private that, outside of a few mentions in obituaries and family accounts, she remains almost entirely out of the public eye. While her cousin, the other Gable grandchild, chased cameras, Maria turned away from them. Her story is not one of scandal or tragedy, but of deliberate anonymity. In many ways, her quiet life is its own act of rebellion against the destructive cycle of fame. Where her mother had suffered from silence imposed, Maria claimed silence by choice. Today, little is publicly known about Maria Lewis. She lives her life outside the glare of headlines, her existence a reminder that not all heirs to Hollywood dynasties choose to bear the weight of the crown. But her very absence from the spotlight raises an intriguing thought. Perhaps the greatest survival strategy for a Gable was not to embrace the legend, but to escape it entirely.
Number 1. Clark James Gable III, born on September 20th, 1988, in Malibu, California, into a family name that was both a golden key and a heavy chain. He was the only son of John Clark Gable, and from the moment of his birth, reporters branded him the image of his grandfather. That resemblance became his calling card: the strong jawline, the dark hair, the piercing gaze. He was the new Gable, a reincarnation of the king of Hollywood, whether he wanted it or not. Unlike his cousin Maria, who grew up in quiet obscurity, Clark Gable III stepped willingly into the limelight. Modeling became his first stage. He worked for fashion brands and appeared in magazines, his photographs echoing the elegance of old Hollywood while carrying a modern edge. Casting directors whispered that he had the look to reignite the Gable legacy. But it wasn't Hollywood films that made him recognizable. It was reality television. In 2012, he became the host of the syndicated series Cheaters, stepping into the lurid world of catching adulterers on camera. The role gave him fame, but it wasn't the type his grandfather would have been proud of. Instead of red carpet premieres, his audience saw him ambushing lovers in motels, microphones catching every scream and slap. To fans of old Hollywood, the contrast was jarring. The king of Hollywood's grandson presiding over televised chaos. Still, Clark Gable III leaned into the spotlight. He founded a clothing line, pursued acting, and made appearances at conventions and Hollywood events. But behind the cameras, his life told a different story, one filled with turbulence and shadows. In 2011, he was arrested for pointing a laser at a police helicopter, an impulsive stunt that earned him 10 days in jail. Later came drug use, personal struggles, and the relentless pressure of living up to a family name that felt more like a burden than a blessing. Friends described him as charismatic but troubled, ambitious but restless, a man always caught between opportunity and self-destruction. Then, on February 22, 2019, tragedy struck. Clark Gable III was found unresponsive at his home in Dallas, Texas. He was only 30 years old. The cause of death was later revealed to be an accidental overdose of fentanyl, oxycodone, and alprazolam. The news sent shockwaves, not just through his family, but through fans who couldn't help but compare his fate to the tragedies that had haunted Hollywood's golden families for generations. He left behind a young daughter, Shayla, just 18 months old at the time. Clark Gable's great-grandchild, destined to grow up with a legacy even more complicated than her father's. Clark Gable III's story was one of ambition, rebellion, and tragedy. He wanted to reclaim the family name, to carve out a place in Hollywood for a new generation of Gables. But in the end, the weight of the crown proved too much. And so the grandson who most resembled the king of Hollywood became another reminder of a haunting truth. Fame may be inherited, but peace never is.
The story of Clark Gable's grandchildren is less about stardom and more about survival. On one side, there is Maria Lewis, who inherited not the glittering promise of Hollywood, but the heavy silence her mother Judy Lewis had carried since childhood. Instead of chasing cameras, Maria chose privacy, carving out a quiet life that rejects the spotlight. Her absence from tabloids and television isn't an accident, it's a statement, a refusal to let a famous name dictate her destiny. On the other side stands Clark James Gable III, who carried the family name like a torch, determined to rekindle its flame. He modeled, he acted, he hosted a television series, and he tried to live up to the image of his grandfather. But with each step into the limelight, he found himself in a cycle of scandal and struggle. In the end, the same name that gave him opportunity also pulled him toward tragedy. Two grandchildren, two choices, two fates. One chose silence, the other chose spectacle. One vanished into anonymity, the other burned too brightly, too quickly. Their stories mirror the contradictions of Clark Gable himself, a man adored by millions, yet absent from the lives of those who most needed him. The grandchildren never met their grandfather, yet his presence defined everything about their paths. Maria inherited the shadow of his silence. Clark Gable III inherited the burden of his myth. And so the Gable dynasty stands today, not as a proud lineage of Hollywood royalty, but as a reminder of the fragile cost of fame. A name that once ruled the screen now lingers as both crown and curse. Behind every legendary name are lives the world was never meant to see. And so the question remains, if you were born carrying the name Gable, would you embrace it or bury it forever?